Sequels often have a hard job to do. They gotta match the original, continue the legacy, and expand on the lore established by the previous installments. You do these things and you have yourself a worthy sequel. That's exactly what the Highlander TV series did back in the 90s. It was what we deserved after the original Highlander movie, and that's reason enough to explore the Highlander TV series. In this video, we will explore the magnificent show, but also explore its downfall that came about in the 6th season. Let's begin, shall we? But before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Forging an immortal legacy, the creation of the Highlander TV series. Highlander The Series started in 1992 and ran till 98. Of course, the show took the 86 Highlander films concept and spun it into its own universe. But it also became one of the most celebrated fantasy TV shows of the time. In the TV version of the Highlander universe, the prize from the movie, which was, the ultimate prize for an immortal, was still up for grabs. Okay, if you're still confused about what it is, the prize is simply all the powers of the immortals who ever lived. This time around, there were loads of immortals duking it out for eternity to get it. The show stars Duncan McLoud, played by Adrian Paul, a younger cousin to the film's Connor McLoud. Christopher Lambert, who played Connor, appeared in the pilot, but that's about it. The series was a hit worldwide, and received Gemini and Saturn awards. Right from the beginning, we find Duncan with his girlfriend Tessa running an antique shop, when a young thief, Richie Ryan, stumbled upon a deadly face-off between Duncan, the villainous immortal Slan Quince, and Connor. This tussle drags Duncan back into the game, which was basically their endless battle royale, where they won power or the quickening from each other by decapitation. The series really digs into Duncan's life, focusing on his bonds with mortals and fellow immortals, friends, family, love interests, and enemies alike. A couple of seasons in, we meet the Watchers, led by Joe Dawson, and other immortals like Darius, Amanda, and Mythos. By season 5, it looked like the series was done for, but a last-minute call resurrected it for a 6th season. Trouble was, most of the cast had moved on, which made the season feel a bit off, especially as it tried, and failed, to set up a spin-off with new characters. They even tried spotlighting a new female immortal to lead the spin-off, but fans were kinda done with it by now. Eventually, the spin-off baton was passed to Elizabeth Grayson's Amanda for Highlander the Raven. Despite the effort, the Raven didn't quite capture hearts, and got axed after just 1 season, and I guess it was for the best. Highlander The Series Season 1. Season 1 of Highlander The Series starts with Duncan McLoud and Tessa Noel's peaceful life in the Pacific Northwest, where they run an antique store. But of course, they were in a show, and its story needed to move ahead, so their life gets rudely interrupted. A break-in by Richie Ryan during Tessa's birthday celebrations sets off a chain of events. This chain of events introduces Richie and the audience to the world of the immortals. Duncan faces off against Slan Quince, an evil immortal. The battle was pretty dramatic, but Duncan managed to win against the bad guy. In fact, Duncan also experiences the explosive power of a quickening. As the season continues, Duncan takes Richie under his wing and explains the truth about his 400-year existence. The series dives deeper into Duncan's life. More often than not, an episode revolved around Duncan's encounters with various immortals, some seeking revenge, others old scores to settle. Tessa got to witness the quickening when Duncan defeated the survivalist named Immortal Caleb Cole. Then there was Andrew Ballin, another immortal, who had killed his lover, and Tessa had seen him in the act, so he wanted to kill her. But Duncan was there for some much-needed protection. Up until now, the series was just about introductions, but it was gonna become darker and more thrilling turns with deep subplots. The episode titled Band of Brothers brings to light a bunch of interesting characters, both enemies and friends. Tessa gets a job offer to curate a sculpture exhibition in Paris. As Tessa, Duncan, and Richie mull this over, Duncan receives a mysterious package from Paris. What did it contain? Well, it was a set of runes from his friend and mentor Darius. These runes reveal that an ancient immortal named Grayson was on his way to Seacover to slay a peacemaker named Victor Paulus. You see, Darius used to be a military general, but he turned into a peace-seeking priest after a transformative quickening, and Grayson, his once loyal lieutenant, was not happy about this. Since then, Grayson has been trying to seek revenge from Darius and to thwart the peacekeeping missions. Fearing for the safety of Tessa and Richie, Duncan sends them away for protection and faces Grayson in a battle that pushes Duncan to his limits. Despite Grayson being 1,400 years more experienced and having insurmountable levels of rage and aggression, Duncan managed to win. Plot armor, I suppose. suppose. Nevertheless, following the intense confrontation, Duncan, Tessa, and Richie relocate to Paris. Tessa finally starts her new career as a curator, while Duncan adapts to a leisurely life on a barge. But once again, the peace is short-lived when Duncan helps the police investigate a mime-turned-assassin. Duncan offers to help the police by identifying the man, and Duncan meets Inspector Lebrun. The inspector was nearly convinced that he had seen Duncan before, but couldn't exactly name the time and place. Anyway, the two of them solve the case, and only later does Lebrun recollect that Duncan was the one chasing the assassin named Coiler, when Lebrun was just a young gendarme. Later in the show, Duncan McLoud meets another enemy named Xavier St. Cloud, a gas poisoner. Duncan neutralizes one of Xavier's gas grenades by tossing it into a cement mixer. Unfortunately, Inspector Lebrun saw Duncan throwing the grenade and mistook Duncan as the perpetrator behind the gas attacks. Naturally, Lebrun sets out to apprehend him. Meanwhile, Duncan races against time to stop Xavier from executing another gaseous terror on an exhibition organized by Tessa. The fight ends with Duncan managing to sever Xavier's hand, forcing him to flee the scene. Later, we meet two of Duncan's former lovers, Grace and Amanda. In the season finale titled The Hunters, Duncan McLoud reunites with his old comrade, Hugh Fitzcairn, who brings news of vanishing immortals. Their investigation leads to the discovery that Darius, Duncan's mentor, has been beheaded inside his church. In yet another attack on Duncan and Fitzcairn, Fitz gets abducted. Determined to save his friend, Duncan returns to Darius' place and finds a hidden book left by him. It revealed info about a secret society of mortals called the Hunters, who had a detailed history of immortals. This forces Duncan to infiltrate their society's lair, where he finds Fitzcairn seconds away from execution. Of course, Duncan saves Fitz and faces off against the society's zealot leader, intent on eradicating all immortals. The fanatic escapes and leaves Duncan to deal with the loss of Darius. Duncan scatters Darius' ashes into the Seine River and swears vengeance against the Hunters. Highlander The Series Season 2. Season 2 started with a revamped intro, and Joe Dawson's voice tells you everything you need to know about Duncan McLoud's journey, the nuances attached to being an immortal, the game, the prize, and pretty much everything else that the viewer needed to know. Following Darius' murder, a vengeful Duncan returns to Seacouver, and all he had was a book called The Chronicle that Darius left behind. His quest leads him to a bookstore and its owner, Dawson, who initially denies knowledge of the Chronicle. Duncan's pursuit of suspicious onlookers introduces him to Dawson's true role as his watcher, part of a secret society tracking immortals. Despite his initial disbelief, Duncan learns that the Watchers are real when he discovers Darius' killer is Dawson's brother-in-law, James Horton. Duncan confronts and seemingly kills Horton, opening his eyes to the existence of the Watchers. Now, let me tell you, the Hunters from the previous episode were actually a subset of the Watchers. You could say they were the more violent faction who took the whole watching the immortals thing too seriously, and instead of just observing and documenting, the Hunters turned to killing the immortals, because they believed that the immortals were an abomination. The season continues as Duncan comes to the rescue of two old friends. He helps Gregor Powers, an immortal photographer detached from humanity, rediscover the value of life and connection. Meanwhile, Duncan faces the pain of seeing Linda Plager, a mortal former lover, succumb to age. However, another plot twist arrives in the form of an immortal called Michael Moore. This guy was seeking Duncan's help against Quentin Barnes, an ancient rival, but it's later revealed that Michael and Quentin are the same person, split into two personas. The schizophrenic struggle ends with Duncan honoring Michael's request to end his turmoil. Eventually, Tessa and Richie are attacked by a mugger. While Tessa does not make it alive, Richie awakens from his mortal wound as a newly born immortal. Devastated, Duncan sells the antique store. Duncan McLoud later took ownership of the dojo where he and Richie had been training, and he moved into the loft above it. Charlie DeSalvo remained the manager, but peace is a fleeting concept in the world of immortals. While preventing an assassination attempt on the British ambassador, an IRA terrorist is killed. The deceased's wife, immortal Annie Devlin, and an old friend of Duncan's, seeks vengeance against Richie. Despite Duncan trying his best to talk her out of fighting Richie, Annie could not be budged. All she wanted was revenge. Naturally, Duncan becomes cautious and prepares Richie for a potential fight with Annie. Richie chooses to face her and wins, but spares her life. Following this, Annie leaves without further conflict. Mid-season brought back Xavier St. Cloud, who, now with a mechanical hand, invades invades the dojo with gunmen aiming to eliminate Mac and Charlie. However, Special Agent Renee Delaney becomes an unexpected ally to Duncan. Additionally, Army intelligence seems to be quite interested in Xavier. A warehouse fight with Xavier is interrupted by James Horton, who shoots both Duncan and Charlie. Despite the attack, Duncan escapes and later confronts Joe Dawson about Horton's apparent survival. Charlie is left bewildered by Duncan's miraculous recovery from a fatal shot, to which Duncan promises an explanation. Meanwhile, Duncan and Delaney consider their next steps, both tactically and personally. Dawson, having fallen out with Horton post-recovery, provides Duncan with Horton's location. Duncan's pursuit ends with Xavier and Horton escaping Paris. With Charlie recovering, Duncan sets off for Paris, determined to end this once and for all. Upon landing in France, Duncan is surprised to find Renee Delaney already there. You see, she had used US military resources to beat him to it. She leverages his cooperation by threatening his passport. She drops him off at his barge, which had been displaced by the Seine's flooding. Interestingly, he finds Maurice, a strange neighbor. After clearing his barge, Duncan and Delaney are thrust into danger when a mercenary sent by Horton attempts to kill them. But Delaney manages to neutralize the threat. Eventually, the couple manages to kill Xavier, but Horton remains at large. Sometime later, Duncan fought Nefertiti, an Egyptian handmaiden from Cleopatra's era, and this was kinda his first time fighting a female immortal in battle. Needless to say, he won and took Nefertiti's head. Duncan also helps Amanda, the former love interest, in taking out Luther, a fellow student of their mentor named Rebecca, whom Luther had murdered. Additionally, Richie gets wrongly accused of murders committed by a man named Martin Hyde, and naturally, our guy Duncan goes to the rescue. Richie's troubles continue as he's pursued by Watchers, but he escapes with help from Pete Wilder. Suspicious, Duncan discovers that it was a ruse by James Horton, who also has plans with a woman named Lisa Milan, who had been surgically altered to resemble Tessa, but nothing could save Horton from Duncan's wrath. In the end, he decides it's time to move on from mourning Tessa, so he sells the barge and heads back to seek Hoover with Richie. Highlander The Series Season 3. In Season 3, Duncan and a woman named Anne enjoy a choir recital, unaware that one of the monks, Paul, is an immortal friend of Duncan's. But that was not the only surprise. They were super unaware that they had walked into their own death party, because the event was being manipulated by Callas, another one of many vengeful immortals. Callas kills Paul and targets Duncan by framing Joe for drug dealing. Additionally, he implicates Anne in patient deaths. Duncan uncovers Callas' schemes, exonerates Joe and Anne, and faces Callas in battle. Anne witnesses Duncan's apparent demise, but of course he survives. Meanwhile, Richie pursues motorcycle racing as a new career path. Duncan knew that till the time Callas was kicking, he was not safe, so he opted for discretion. Keeping in line with this, he relocates to Paris, where he reunites with Hugh Fitzcairn from Season 1, now a culinary instructor. Unfortunately though, Callas murders Fitz's rival and frames Fitz for it. This ends with Fitz's death, and poor Duncan saw the whole thing, as in Callas killing Fitz. Once again, Duncan knew that he had to eliminate the bad guy killing his friends, so Duncan collaborates with Joe to track Callas. Meanwhile, Callas' hunt for information on Mythos, the oldest immortal, leads to the murder of a Watcher historian. Yep, wherever this guy goes, death follows. Duncan is directed to Adam Pearson, a Mythos scholar, only to discover Pearson was in fact Mythos. Yep, the oldest immortal and all that, some 5,000 years if you go by what's considered canon. Callas targets Mythos, hoping to eliminate him, but Mythos figures that he might not be able to stop Mythos, let alone kill him, so he asks Duncan to decapitate him and take his quickening, which would ensure Callas' death. However, Duncan chooses to face Callas directly, rather than through deceit, and he did not wish to concede to Mythos' request. Anyway, the fight between Callas and Duncan is halted by law enforcement, who arrest Callas. You see, Mythos, as Pearson, had identified Callas as a murderer. As the season concludes, Amanda once again shows up at Duncan's and tries to be very, very nice to him. And Duncan knows that she does this sort of stuff only when she's messed up. She confesses to freeing Callas from jail, aiming to kill him, but Amanda's shit plan became shittier when Callas escaped. As would be expected, Amanda is taken by Callas, but she manages to flee. When the Callas issue was still hot, another problem came to the fore. You see, there's a disk, basically a database of Watchers and Immortals, and if it went public, no one would have been safe. Callas acquires the database and threatens to reveal the secret of the world of Immortals, unless Duncan surrenders. Refusing to let their existence be exposed, Duncan and the Immortals rally to confront Callas. The final battle atop the Eiffel Tower sees Duncan victorious, with Callas' death causing a powerful quickening that inadvertently destroys the compromising database and darkens Paris. Oh, and Duncan and Amanda ponder about getting into a relationship. Highlander The Series Season 4. Season 4 of Highlander opens with Duncan McLoud finding a bracelet that reignites memories of his first love, Deborah Campbell. This leads him and Joe Dawson back to Scotland for the first time in 2 centuries. Intending to lay the bracelet to rest in Deborah's grave, Duncan arrives in Glenfinnan to find the village plagued by a series of mysterious murders and immersed in the legends of his own past. Initially met with suspicion by Rachel McLeod, the local innkeeper, Duncan's actions slowly earn her trust. The legend of Duncan McLoud is reenacted when he confronts and defeats the Viking raider Canwulf. Duncan and Joe arrive in San Francisco, only to bump into a fight between immortal Andrew Cord and Charlie DeSalvo. The incident reveals a tangled web of past loyalties, as Joe recognizes Cord as a former comrade from Vietnam. However, the man was now involved in the business of trading defective weapons to Balkan revolutionaries, a cause close to Charlie. Duncan finds himself caught between his friendship with Charlie and Joe's historical bond with Cord. Meanwhile, Kenny the Immortal, who looks like a child, seeks refuge with Anne from immortal Terrence Kincaid, which forces her to contact Duncan. Through the flashbacks, we learn that Kincaid was a ship captain in 1778, and Duncan persuaded mutineers to marry rather than execute. In the present, it's revealed that Kenny and Amanda share a history that actually goes back to 1182 England, where Amanda met Kenny after his family's death and became his mentor. So anyway, more stuff happens in the season, which ends with the Watcher hierarchy gunned down by a mysterious immortal. Oh, and Dawson ended up grievously wounded in the last episode. Highlander The Series Season 5. Returning to Seacouver, Duncan meets Cassandra, who tells him that she's being targeted by Roland Cantos, a former pupil turned adversary. Cantos was a unique immortal who used his hypnotic voice as a weapon. He nearly defeats Duncan. However, Duncan counters this advantage by blocking out the sound and ultimately defeats Cantos. It's revealed that Richie was in town. Despite their strained relationship from past events, Duncan seeks to reconcile with Richie, who struggles with nightmares from when Duncan nearly killed him. However, things go super south when Richie kills his mentor, Carter Wellen, which in turn invites the wrath of Wellen's own mentor, Harish Clay. After Richie's arrest for attempting to acquire a new sword, Duncan intervenes, offering both a weapon and a warning about Clay's powers and skills. Ultimately, Duncan and Richie resolve their differences, and Duncan's like he should be the one to confront and defeat Clay. In another plot, Carl Robinson's life as a baseball star is disrupted when an immortal challenge exposes him. Of course, it leads to a manhunt. Carl's complex path with Matthew McCormick comes to light. The guy had been enslaved, and let's just say things were not going well for him during the enslavement. However, Duncan mediates and convinces McCormick to forego vengeance and aid Carl in staging his own death to start anew. Then there's an episode about Amanda's past and her relationship with Duncan from the 1920s. One of the plots has a skirmish with a crime lord and some stolen money. Nothing too special there either. Anyway, in the episode titled The Messenger, Richie meets an immortal messenger who's all about advocating peace among their kind. This guy challenges Duncan's beliefs. We find that Mythos has reappeared, only to find the messenger using Mythos' name. But Mythos allows the impersonation because it was kind of keeping assailants at bay. I mean, they were going after the messenger, so no harm there. The season wraps with Duncan being identified as a warrior prophesized to confront an ancient evil. After a mysterious warning is cut short by the appearance of James Horton, Duncan investigates, learning of his role in battling the demon Ahriman from archaeologist Jason Landry's research. Despite his reluctance, Duncan faces manipulations by Ahriman, who uses the guises of Kronos and Allison Landry to unsettle him. Richie, misled by illusions, becomes an unwitting pawn in Ahriman's scheme, which leads to a tragic fight at a racecourse where Duncan, deceived by Ahriman's trickery, accidentally kills Richie. Devastated, Duncan offers Mythos a chance to end his life, but when refused, he departs, leaving behind his sword and a part of himself. Highlander The Series Season 6. After taking care of a viral threat at the beginning of the 6th season, Duncan turned to his new challenge. Kronos kidnapped Cassandra and sent his minions, aka Horsemen, after Duncan. He defeats one of the Horsemen, Caspian, and narrowly escaped another, named Silas. Duncan and Mythos infiltrate a submarine base and confront the remaining Horsemen. This ended in Duncan's victorious duel with Kronos, while Mythos dealt with Silas. Although the bad guys were defeated and the threat neutralized, Duncan and Mythos' friendship was strained over suspicions of Mythos' motives. Duncan's journey then leads him to confront the ancient evil from Season 5, Ahriman, who also caused Richie's death. Aided by allies including Father Beaufort and Joe Dawson, Duncan got into a psychological and physical battle against Ahriman. Eventually, Duncan accepts his inner inner darkness, which in turn rendered Ahriman powerless, and that's how Duncan saved those around him, though he had to suffer personal losses and betrayals. The season ended in a dramatic battle with Irish terrorist Liam O'Rourke, who sought retribution for past events. However, Duncan's resolve allows him to vanquish O'Rourke. The cast and key characters of Highlander the series. Number 1. Duncan McLoud. Duncan McLoud kind of stopped growing in his early 30s. Yep, that's when he first died, and it's a well-known fact that immortals stop aging after their first death. So yeah, he's been around in the world for at least 4 centuries, and that's precisely why and how he has the vigor of early adulthood and the wisdom of the ages. The guy was born to lead his clan of the McLeods, and it's safe to say that Duncan's life has been a story of valor, justice, and an unwavering moral compass. In the series, he became the quintessential guardian who stepped into the fray wherever injustice cast its shadow. And almost always, this great warrior and survivor is guided by a stark view of right and wrong. Throughout his immortal journey, Duncan took up the role of protector and avenger and was driven by a sense of duty toward those under his care. Bold interventions and daring righteous acts have never been alien to this man who's done it all. From smuggling slaves to freedom and aiding war-stricken civilians, to mentoring new immortals and teaching them to deal with their new existence with honor, there's nothing where Duncan faltered. As far as combat skills are concerned, they are well beyond any mortal and better than most immortals. And why not? He's honed these skills over lifetimes of training in diverse martial disciplines.
Duncan!
Number 2. Tessa Noel. Tessa Noel, Duncan's main girl for a while, was understanding and supportive. She served as a grounding force for Duncan, and I think without Tessa, he would have had a difficult time remaining grounded in his humanity. I'm not an immortal, but I know that when someone cares about you and stands by you through the thick and thin of life, your life becomes easier, and you become a better person. Likewise, Tessa's ability to empathize deeply with others allowed her to connect with Duncan on a profound level, especially after he revealed his immortality to her. Rather than reacting with fear or revulsion, she expressed concern for the loneliness his eternal life must entail. I mean, this lady could figure that Duncan probably outlives many of the people he loves. Having said that, she was fiercely honest and intolerant of evasion. Tessa didn't shy away from confronting Duncan or challenging his decisions. I spoke earlier about how Duncan had his own moral compass straight. Well, Tessa helped him with that on several occasions. Her courage was unmistakable, notably when she was kidnapped by Caleb Cole and his gang. She refused to be intimidated and used her wit to create dissent among her captors, which eventually aided her rescue. Speaking of courage, the woman threw herself as a bait to catch a serial killer. So yeah, I don't want to reduce her as a character who simply existed as Duncan's girl. She was an amazing character in her own right.
Yes, we do.
Number 3. Richie Ryan. Richie grew up in the instability of foster care and drifted towards petty crime once his foster mother passed away. Almost 18, he burglarized McLoud and Noel antiques. This led to his first encounter with the immortal world, and he witnessed firsthand Duncan and Slan Quince's fight. Duncan saw Richie's potential beyond his wayward path and chose mentorship over retribution. He introduced Richie to the complexities of immortality. Under Duncan's guidance, Richie's character evolved significantly. From a rebellious teenager, he grew into a person with a strong moral compass, often driven to protect those in distress. As an immortal, he started with a katana and then went on to use a more personal Spanish rapier and finally a Gothic broadsword. Number 4. Amanda. Amanda was born in the 9th century, and since then, she's been a rather cunning and often manipulative woman who uses her sharp wit and charm to deal with the world on her own terms. Despite her tendency to scheme, she chose her targets with a certain moral compass and favored the wealthy or institutions over individuals with good hearts. Her relationship with Duncan McLoud was fairly complex and was actually riddled with adventures and misadventures that spanned centuries. Their first encounter in 1635 was the beginning of their on and off relationship. But at no point did they become each other's enemies. In fact, they weren't even frenemies. As Duncan once said, she was more of a bad habit to him. Duncan often found himself reluctantly embroiled in Amanda's plans and acted out of a mix of protective instinct. And of course, there was this irresistible pull that Duncan just could not ignore. Despite the fragmented and sporadic nature of their reunions, whenever they met, it kinda rekindled a passionate connection that, while never formalized, was deeply rooted in mutual loyalty and an unspoken love.
You're cool!
Number 5. Mythos. Mythos, with millennia under his belt, approached life with a perspective shaped by countless experiences. His experiences taught him that the world and the people in it were gray, which contrasted sharply with Duncan McLoud's more black and white view of the world. His past as one of the Four Horsemen during the Bronze Age goes on to say that he could be extremely cruel if he wanted to, and yet his actions during the antebellum era in the southern United States reflect a deep-seated compassion. This dichotomy between these two major characters of the show often leads to moments of both humor and tension. Beyond his complex moral landscape, Mythos has always been up for learning, companionship, and philosophical debate, yet he's also known for his abrupt exits, particularly in times of trouble, such as after Richie's death. I guess that's how this guy has managed to survive when most perished. Exploring the popularity and significance of Highlander the series. If you ignore the last season, the show was a compelling watch, especially for fans of the fantasy genre. In my opinion, it was definitely better than the film sequels to the original Highlander movie, and that's because of its unique exploration of immortality. Then you had these super engaging sword fights and richly designed flashbacks to historical periods. No matter who says what, they did spend money on the making of the period scenes. However, I have to admit that the direction was very uncertain. I mean the quality of the direction. A few episodes were simply awesome, while a few others were just acceptable. However, the series as a whole should be hailed for its intelligence, style, and wit. I believe the show's middle seasons were its high point, and there were significant improvements in writing, quality control, and creative depth. However, there remain several weaknesses, at least as far as acting and the exploitation of the Highlander concept are concerned. But overall, it's definitely worth your time. So that was all for this one, but we're gonna continue to explore these gems from the days gone by. So yeah, stick around for more. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone!